Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Once again, folks, and welcome to NHL Wraparound, Neil and Vic. And as you know, for the last 5 episodes, it has just been the two of us as we did our summer cooler and then our last episode from the GM perch. But now we are recording on a weekly schedule and we are back to one of our big staples, and that is a great lineup of guests. And Neil, we're starting with a pretty high bar today.
We're starting the season with a very high bar. Someone who I'm honored to be in a club with, and that is a general manager who's won the Stanley Cup. And you don't find a lot of them around. Obviously, there's only one per year that goes on. But in this case, we're going to be talking with Doug Armstrong, who's an old friend. I'm going to get more into that in a minute. But the other thing that I share with Doug, welcome to the show, is the fact that no one but Doug Armstrong, since 1967, has been able to win the Stanley Cup in St. Louis. And no one but Neil Smith has been able to win the Cup in New York since 1940. So, Doug, that's a pretty good thing, an honor for the two of us to have together.
Yeah, it is. Obviously, winning, for us being the first to win here in St. Louis, and it was a great thrill for our city and our franchise, and for you to the first in a long time in New York was a big thrill for the city. And I'm probably rooting a little bit more for the Blues to win again than you are the Rangers.
That's right. You're absolutely right. Now, before we go on, Vic and Doug, I have to play something right here.
It's Stevie Wonder's version.
Stevie Wonder and Doug Armstrong turned the big 6-0 2 days ago, September 24th, and Tuesday. And Doug, happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wasn't sure I'd get there, but I'm here now.
Well, I'm 10 years ahead of you, so I'm allowed to say that it was your 60th since I'm 10 years ahead.
Yeah.
And he's still the youngest one on the show, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. You're the only one not collecting Social Security yet.
Yeah, I got to come in this show more often. I don't hear that very much anymore.
Well, you can be a regular on this show, that's for sure. But it is truly a happy birthday. And you'll want to listener watch this show, Doug, yourself later. Maybe you can get the Blues to put it out on social media, because at the end, I'm going to be talking about your dad, who is very much a big part of my life and my scouting life, and starting out with the Red Wings when he was with Montreal. And gosh, it seems like just yesterday that I watched your dad climbing up onto the glass to get out of the way of the puck, that famous number 8. What a staple of my childhood, the original 6. And, when I see a picture of your dad, I go right back to being a kid again, because to see the way they used to do the game in his day, the linesmen and the fights they had to break up and the brawls they had to get into. And I read some funny stories that I'm going to talk about later on. So, he's very special in my life, as you know, as we've spoken about so many times.
Yeah, it was a great childhood. Obviously, I've learned to appreciate all the perks that I had. I think when you grow up into the industry, that's just the norm. The norm was going to the Olympia. The norm was going into the Red Wings locker room. The norm was going to the old gardens. And then as you get older and you have children of your own, I start to understand how lucky I really was, and look back so fondly on the memories that my dad was able to give me and our family of being part of the NHL and getting to meet so many great people along the way.
Do you remember the night that your dad was honored at the Olympia for passing Hayes' record?
I do, and it was. I laugh at that story because I'd say it's like 1,300 games or something, Ironman record, and they gave him a check for $1,300, $1 a game, and I thought that was like millions. Then I look back, so you work 20 years and they give you $1 a game. That didn't seem to be the gift I thought was as big as I thought it was at that time.
Well, anyway, your dad's as I said, very special to me, and getting to scout with him many times over the years and getting to know his sense of humor, which was great. I don't know that the man ever didn't smile. I mean, he was at least in my presence, he was always a happy guy and fun to be with. And, I'm just blessed that I got to spend time with him when I first started my scouting career. It was really good.
Well, I'm not gonna lie to you. I brought the frown on him every once in a while as a kid. No, he was really one of those like a gentleman that when I got into hockey, Neil, and I'd hear yourself and Bob Clark and different guys talk about him as an official, then as a scout. I again just started to appreciate more and more of the impact he had on the game, how much he loved the game, how much he loved the people in the game. And ultimately, Neil and Vic, that's what you understand. It is a people business. At the end of the day, almost that's what it is. And that's what I really enjoy now is being able to help maybe mentor some of the young guys in our group and watch young players and give back to the game that's given the Armstrong family before me and my family so much.
That's a great way to look at it. And for those of you that don't know, Doug is the president of hockey operations and the general manager of St. Louis Blues. So he made sure that there's none of those guys over top of him, those presidents of hockey ops guys. He took both the titles, which is smart. That's what I would do too. So make sure you get those both those titles so you don't get somebody in taking all the credit and none of the blame. Doug, I wanted to ask you, this summer, you did something that caught everybody by surprise, at least those that aren't intimately involved in the office of an NHL team. You signed two RFAs, restricted free agents, to offer sheets, both of them from the Edmonton Oilers, Broberg and Holloway. At the end of the day, the Edmonton Oilers didn't match, and they're now on your team, which has obviously bolstered your team and really elevated you in the summer, along with other moves you made. But I just want to ask you, is this something that other general managers are going to have to use? Is this a tool in their toolbox that they're going to sort of have to use because of the fact there's only so many different ways you can get hockey players, and this is one of the ways that really wasn't being used. Going all the way back to my day, it was rarely ever used.
Yeah, it's a tool that's in the toolbox, but it's hard to get to it in the sense that you need the perfect storm. And our situation this summer was, I thought the Oilers had a really aggressive and solid first couple of days of free agency. But what they did is they to do that, they had to spend their cap equity, and we had cap equity, so we were able to overpay, and we have overpaid for what they've accomplished. Two players. With the sense of, as you said, an acquisition cost to get them, and at the age of 23 that they can grow into being long-term players. So it has to be almost a perfect storm. But I think a manager's job is, and I learned this from the great Harry Stimon when I started, he said, the league puts the CBA together, and our job as managers to find the loopholes and find out how we can improve our team. And that was an opportunity this year. We felt we could improve our team because of the cap space that we had created and the draft, the number of draft picks we've had over the last 4 or 5 years. Like, we are going to go into this draft, Neil, as it sits today, and Vic, with no second, third, or fourth round pick. But for the fourth round pick, we added a 24-year-old player in Texier, and for the second and third, we added two 23-year-olds. So at draft day, people are going to say, geez, the Blues are in this rebuilding process and they don't have these picks. But I look at the age of the players that are going to be here, and it was worth the risk.
And the other thing I would add to that, Doug, is that when you're in the second, third, and fourth round, you're looking up to the sky and praying that you get NHL players on those picks. There's no guarantee you'll get an NHL player or somebody that will ever play in the NHL. And what you got with those three guys you just mentioned is sure NHL players. They already know they're in the NHL. So it takes that out of it. So I would agree with you. I would rather have the known quantity that I know I can't go wrong because they've proven they can play. The second, third, and fourth round pick, you're just hoping that they're going to play.
Well, Neil, you go back to, and I'm not sure how many teams were in the league when you first started, but 21 for me. I mean, now those are really, because we're at 32 teams, that's an extra round. So the fourth round's really a fifth round, and the third, you add 11 more picks in 3 rounds, that's 33. I mean, and you're right. There's an actuary table on how many players are going to play, and for us, knowing that we had players that were going to step into our lineup, and when they're going to step in too. We have players like Thomas and Kyrou that are 25. If you just draft, by the time these players, if they're drafted in the second, third, or fourth round play, they're probably 5 or 6 years away from their draft day. Well, all of a sudden, your core group is now 31. They're no longer your core group. And so what we wanted to try and do was get as many players in a time frame of 4, 5, 6 years that can actually grow together. And I think we've been able to do that now and have a plan that I understand. I'm not naive. We have 12 first-round picks since the 2019 draft. They're not all going to play, and they're not all going to be stars. But if you use the actuary tables, 7 or 8 are going to play, and a few are going to play better than their draft position. We've seen that with Jake Neighbors already. We've seen that with Robert Thomas and Kyrou. So all of a sudden you have a group of guys that can grow together, that can be part of something, and then you use the system of free agency to supplement that group. That's what, when I was fortunate when I got into St. Louis, Larry Plow and John Davidson had been through the 06 to 010 of accumulating assets, being not a good team, and to do that, well, we've sort of expedited that by trading some of those players that we didn't have to draft. And I think we're trying to get back to being a highly competitive team as quick as possible, and not going through the keep your picks, take your lumps for 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and hope you win and hope you get the right player. And as everyone in hockey knows now, with the lottery system, there's no guarantee that if you're bad, you're going to get the first pick. And there's a saying that, you have to also pick a good year to have a bad year. You can pick a year to be last overall, and all of a sudden it's not McDavid or it's not Crosby. It's another player that plays in the league, but it's not a franchise player. So we weren't willing to take that risk here in St. Louis of being out of the playoffs for 7 to 10 years and hoping you find a franchise player in that time frame.
Doug, I wanted to ask you, just following up on the offer sheets, and certainly Neil had experience in the late 90s with Joe Sakic, but the amount of offer sheets over the years has been somewhat spotty. And now that you've really made this splash, acquiring 2 players, no less, do you see going into the future this becoming more a common part of business around the NHL?
Vic, that's hard to, I don't think so. Only because, I look at as I said, I thought the Oilers had a great early July, but they spent their cap equity to do that. I look at Detroit, who had 2 top free agents, and they kept $17 million. So it's not like you didn't want Suter or Raymond. You knew that it was an exercise in futility to do it. You look at the cap space that Boston has left for their goalie. It's not that you don't want the goalie. It's you're not going to get them because they don't have to move heaven and earth to match it. And so I think teams are going to be they are always very aware of who they have coming and make sure they create the space. And again, I think, and I understand where the Oilers are at. They're at a win now mode. I mean, you look at the players that they have. They have to start. They want to start winning cups. They're primed to win cups, and I think they were willing to sacrifice a little bit of tomorrow for today because they're playing in today. I've been there in Dallas. I've been there in St. Louis. Neil's been there, where you understand that you're giving up things you don't want to give up, but you understand chasing the Holy Grail is why we do this too.
I wanted to quickly move on to your head coach coach, Drew Bannister, who took over for Craig Berube last year. And the team really responded in 54 games and went 30-19-5. You've already got a pretty strong core. You know, you don't have a lot of big names, but it's a solid core. You've mentioned a number of the players already. Of course, there's also Colton Parenko and Jordan Binnington and Braden Shen and the like. But where do you see Bannister's evolution as a coach to bring this team back to the playoffs for the first time in 4 years?
Well, I think he would be into that. If you look at Holloway and Broberg, where they're at in their career, Bannister's in that position as a coach. You know, he's in the league now. He's got his feet wet. Now he has to define and describe what he's going to be moving forward. I think we have expedited the process this year by bringing in younger players. We believe we've maybe skipped a year in sort of that retool rebuild. I think we're going to be competitive. We have a lot of guys in that age bracket, and we think he's a good coach. He did a very good job. He took our American League team to the finals. We lost to the Chicago Wolves that year. He did a very good job in the Sioux. And he's in that bracket of young coaches that are getting the opportunity, and I expect him to take full advantage of it.
I wanted to ask you, Doug, following up on Drew Bannister, a question that doesn't have anything to do with the Blues anymore, but I value your opinion on this, especially because of your familiarity. Craig Berube got hired by the Toronto Maple Leafs this summer. We all know that Craig Berube won the Stanley Cup as your head coach. We all know that he's a good NHL coach. There's nothing that I've ever heard bad about Craig Berube, but he won the Stanley Cup with a totally different type of team in St. Louis. I think you'd agree that you were a gutsy, grind it out, heart and soul type of team that year that, upset the Boston Bruins in Game 7 in Boston. I might remind everyone, which I'm sure that a lot of money was lost on that game by people. But that's a different type of team, and that's a Craig Berube type team. If you think back to how Craig Berube played the game, he played the game the way that team, your team in 19 won the Cup. Now he's going to the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's got packed with all-stars, Nylander and Matthews and Marner and Tavares. And, it's quite an enigma in Toronto. I'm not going to ask you if he'll do a good job because we know he'll do a good job. But what do you think? Like, how do you see that? Is it going to be a challenge for him to go to that type of team rather than the grinded out kind of teams you had?
Yeah, I actually, I look at it as the exact opposite. Like the Leafs haven't had the success they've wanted playing a certain style. What are they going to sacrifice to play Craig Berube style hockey, and do they want to do it to win? I don't think Craig has to change. I think that might answer the question. I don't think Craig has to change one thing if they want to win.
Yeah, I get it. Well, that's the way it should be, right? The players should be adapting to the coach, not the coach adapt to the players. Yeah.
Well, again, if you're ripping off trips to the finals every year and not win, like you look at the Buffalo Bills, like they didn't need to change a thing when they lost four Super Bowls in a row because they're in the Super Bowl. Like when that's a good franchise that got bad breaks, But when you're not in the finals year in, year out, you're probably better to look internal than external on how to get there.
You're talking about bad breaks, and your club really got one right at the beginning of the summer with Torey Krug having this pre-arthritic ankle issue. I know that there was going to be some waiting time, and now it's been determined that he's going to miss likely the entire 2024-25 season. So you brought in Broberg. You also signed Pierre-Olivier Joseph, and you also signed somebody that's pretty familiar with the Central Division, and that's Ryan Suter, who'll be playing his 12th season exclusively within the Central Division. Did you sign Suter in particular knowing that you were going to probably lose Krug for the entire season?
Yeah, we had an indication of Torey's situation at that point. And yeah, Suits only needs W to get yellow bingo there in the division. But no, he's an experienced player, and then adding Broberg, it just shifted everything. But I look at our group now; we have 9 NHL defensemen on one-way contracts that want to play here, and maybe with something that didn't have a lot of depth has a lot more depth now, and he's got great experience he can share with the guys. But we didn't bring him here to coach and share experience. We brought him here to play. And, that's going to be his job responsibility is to, as veterans always do, they take out the whip and they snap it behind him to keep the young Cubs away from getting their job. And that's what Suter is doing right now.
Did the familiarity within the division play into this decision, or was it just this is a really solid NHL defenseman that was available and you jumped on it?
Yeah, the latter. When you're closing on 1,500 games, I think you can work your way around against team and division, and we brought him in because of his experience, because of what he thinks he can bring us, and not just for the divisional games.
Doug, on closing with you, I want to talk about you, and another thing that caught me by surprise in the summer, not as surprising as the offer sheets, but was that you announced that you're going to stay 2 more seasons as a GM and then turn the reins over to Alexander Steen, but you'll remain with the team through 28-29. Have I got all that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what led to that decision? And because you're a young guy.
Yeah. I actually feel young too. It's, I said, remember growing up, it'd be Freedom 55. That was supposed to be, retire at 55. I think, I think those days are gone on those commercials. But I just thought, Neil, I have 15 years now as the manager of one team. It's going to be 17. And, I ask people to make sacrifices every day for our franchise, our players, our staff. And the message, it's not stale and old, but I want to get out before it becomes stale and old. Do you know what I mean? And I think after 17 years, they just need, I think I could go somewhere else and do again, that's the arrogance of my, go somewhere else and do a good job and bring that energy. But I know for this group right now, at some point they need a new voice. It's not that the message is wrong, it's just the voice. And it's like with a coach, and I just think after 17 years, and there was someone there that I think is going to do a great job in Steen. So it just made sense to me to understand that my shelf life as a manager with the Blues was coming to an end. And, it was nice of the ownership group to want to keep me around and to help Alex over 3 years after that. But regardless if I was doing that, it was going to be time for a new voice here, just because as I said, I think everything has a shelf life, and we're getting close to a new voice being needed. Plus, we talked earlier about having a young core that can grow together. I think having a young manager that can grow with a young core is going to be great for this franchise. As I said, I came here in 2008, and I was able to go this long with the core. I think Steen's coming in. He's going to be able to go a long run with the core that's ready to take off.
Last one for me, Doug, is in talking about Steen, and I'm sure that there were a lot of potential candidates that were going to succeed you in this role. What about Steen that separated him from anybody else that may have been considered?
Well, the opportunity to work with him as from a manager-player relationship. And as Neil can attest to, if you're trying to win, you have to have uncomfortable conversations with your leaders. If it's all comfortable, you're really not going to get any better because, and it's a two-way street. He would tell me things that were good for the team that I needed to do better, and I could tell him things that I thought they needed to do to make us better. And he always was a team-first player. He reminded me a lot of, and again, I've been so fortunate in my time to work with Bob Gainey, one of the ultimate leaders in hockey. Work with Bob Clark, one of the ultimate leaders in hockey. For the Canadian national program, work with Steve Yzerman, one of the ultimate leaders in hockey. And so you observe on how these guys handle things. And I observed Steen as a player, and then those years he was in our management group as living in Sweden. A lot of those same traits, and those are ones that aren't teachable. You can observe them, you can put them in, but but he's just a natural leader. And I think that that's going to bode him well. And the things that I think we can teach him, the scouting, the drafting, the business side of it is teachable. But the things that he has about competition, about building a team, about right from wrong, they're ingrained. And again, he's a guy that comes from a great hockey family too. And so this has been in his DNA for 40 years.
Well, Doug, I want to mention to everybody that you're not just a one-time Stanley Cup winner, that you also won one in Dallas under Bob Gainey in 1999, the only Stanley Cup that the Dallas Stars have seen. And you've had a great career, and I'm sure you're going to continue to have a great career in your last 2 years as GM. And whatever you decide to do after that, whether you decide to stay in that role, being the guy that takes none of the blame but all of the credit, or you decide to go somewhere else, I know you'll be successful. And it's just been great having you on here. And I really, truly believe you really improved your team in the off season. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Blues play this year, because I just think you've really improved, and I want to see if I'm right, and I hope I am.
Yeah, well, I hope you are too. And it's exciting because we're a different style of team. We're much faster. We're going to be hunting pucks. It's just the evolution of our team is there. But I always enjoy, Neil, talking to you, and Vic, yourself also, getting to know you now. And I love talking hockey with hockey people. So thank you very much for having me on.
You're welcome. Thank you,
Pleasure.
Doug.
Thank you. And just a reminder that our website has all of our episodes on audio and video. It's NHLWraparound.com. And Neil, before we move on, I want to do a little bit of house cleaning as it pertains to our last show, and most specifically the Leon Draisaitl contract, because sometimes I think when you're in between seasons and you say next season and this season, sometimes the language can get a little bit confusing, and we got a couple of notes about that. So just to clarify, Leon Draisaitl this season will make $8.5 million. His extension kicks in next year, $14 million from 2025-26 through 2032-33. Connor McDavid has 2 more years left on his deal at 12.5, and then he becomes a UFA in 26-27. So the upshot here is these 2 players will represent about 24% of the Oilers salary cap this season, which is $88 million, and it will bump up to 28.8 next season with an expected bump of the cap to $92 million. But really where we were going with this, Neil, was just kind of what Stan Bowman had done in Chicago with Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. The same thing is happening here, where he's really kind of loading up with 2 players.
Yeah, and he's got to be very careful, and he knows that better than anybody, because if you look at what happened to his Blackhawks after the Kane and Toews signing, they had a couple of good years followed by a bunch of real tough years, because they really didn't have the money to pay a supporting cast that you need to have to be a contender. So he's going to have to be careful that he doesn't run into the same situation there in Edmonton.
Yeah, and not forget, Darnell Nurse is making over $9 million, and Evan Bouchard is really in line after this season for a considerable bump from, I believe he's making just under $4 million now. So that is going to be something that we're going to watch throughout the season. And talking about contracts, Sidney Crosby extended for 2 years at the same number as his previous deal, $8.7 million per year. And I was thinking, boy, this is really nice, because he's given the Penguins a hometown discount. I mean, I think it'd be hard to argue that he would still be a 8-figure player based on his current production. But then I did a little bit more research, and I see that he is actually the all-time leader in career earnings based on the close of the 23-24 season. He's made just under $153 million in the course of his career, which, as you know, is just a shade less than what you and I make for making the show. But, what are your thoughts here in terms of him freeing up some money so Kyle Dubas can actually kind of fill in with greater support to give Crosby a chance to win as he winds down his NHL career?
It just sort of goes to the folklore of Sidney Crosby and what you think of Sidney Crosby. I don't think, no matter what anybody thinks, whether they're a fan or they're, desperately against the Penguins and Sidney Crosby, he is a class act, and he's always been a class act, and he's always carried himself off the ice as the consummate gentleman, the consummate ambassador for the game, and the consummate Penguin. To be honest with you, you see pictures all the time of him delivering season tickets and doing things that only the Penguins do, and it just doesn't surprise you when Sidney Crosby says, "Yeah, I really don't need to make $15 million. I can stay at 8.7, but please get us some players to play with us. And I want to get back into the playoffs." I've seen where he has said that he desperately wants that, the juices flowing for the playoff postseason. And let's hope for his sake the Penguins are able to find a way to get back in.
Well, he has certainly given his GM that opportunity to do so. I want to turn to some injury news really quickly, and a couple of significant backliners going down in the last couple of days. On Tuesday evening, Ryan Lindgren of the New York Rangers sustained an upper body injury in what is apparently, again, a fight against Scott Mayfield of the New York Islanders. He was responding to a hit that Mayfield had put on Philip Broberg in center ice. Lindgren engaged him, came away with an upper body injury, and he is expected to miss several weeks. And then on Wednesday evening, Drew Doughty of the Los Angeles Kings got his left leg caught in the boards as he was going for a puck with Tanner Pearson of the Vegas Golden Knights. So, Neil, as a GM, this has got to be one of the greatest fears, that you go into training camp, you're expecting your players to start the season healthy, and now you've got to readjust on the fly, knowing that definitely in Lindgren's case and potentially in Doughty's case, those are two big names that are going to miss the start of the season.
Well, for the Los Angeles Kings, Drew Doughty is synonymous with the Stanley Cups. His number will be retired, his number 8, when he retires from the NHL. So that's how good of a player he's been for the Kings. And he's not the player that he was a few years ago. However, he is still for heavy-duty minutes on that back line. So if he is down for any length of time, that's a huge blow to the LA Kings. Ryan Lindgren plays like he's 8 feet tall every game when he's not 8 feet tall. He's 6 feet something, but plays incredibly hard night after night, shift after shift. I thought of you when I saw this injury, Vic, because how many times have we talked about it, that just because somebody throws a hit on your guy, and that guy happens to get hurt from a clean hit, that means that guy, Scott Mayfield in this case of the Islanders, has to fight. And Ryan Lindgren thought, I have to go and make him fight because I have to stick up for Philip Broberg. And Philip Broberg comes back in a little while and plays in the game, and Lindgren himself is now hurt and out of the game. So it's sort of silly the way this tribal stuff works in the NHL, where you have to stick up for your teammate, even if it was a clean hit. And gosh knows, the New York Rangers have seen their own captain, Jacob Trouba, have to fight countless times because he is such a good open ice hitter, and they were all clean hits. So that'll be a blow to the Rangers, no doubt about it, if they lose Ryan Lindgren for any length of time.
And we certainly don't want to speculate on Doughty, but anybody that has seen the video and his inability to put any weight on that left leg, it did not look very good, but we'll wait and see and hope for the best that the injury is not as bad as it appeared last night. So Moving forward here, it is time, and I wish we had a little bit of a horn intro for this for you, Neil, but it is time for your burning questions, and you have carefully selected one burning question from each of the four divisions, and we're going to start in the Atlantic, and a now rather public amount of beefing going on regarding Jeremy Swayman and whether he will or will not sign a contract with the Bruins before the season starts.
Yeah, Vic, I think for this segment, actually, we should have our producer, Bob, put flames up on the screen for the burning questions. Wouldn't that be cool? These are burning questions.
They are.
Will the Boston Bruins get Jeremy Swayman signed or not? And the reason it's such a big question is they've already traded Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators and sort of put themselves at risk now. Only they signed Korpisalo in the offseason to be the backup to Swayman, but it looks like they're going to have to start the season with Korpisalo as their number one guy. And remember one thing, too, if they don't get Swayman signed by December, he's ineligible to play for the rest of the year. So, it's really important if the Boston Bruins are going to be as good as they can be, which we don't know what that is, but as good as they can possibly be, they're going to have to get Swayman in the net. They're not going to be nearly as good without Jeremy Swayman.
And Korpisalo has been pretty much a career backup, and I don't think that this is the guy that the Bruins necessarily want to put their saddle on and have to ride for a better part of the season. And I guess a question for you is, did the Bruins box themselves into a corner by trading Ullmark knowing that Swayman had not signed, and he did go to arbitration last year? I don't think he wants to go through that again. He said he was scarred from that episode a season ago. So this is a pretty contentious thing going on.
Yeah, and arbitration's not fun for anybody, that's for sure, because suddenly the general manager and the club have to go in and, quite honestly, disparage the play of their player. And the agent and the player have to go in and say that they're the next Glenn Hall. They're the Jacques Plante. They're the best thing since sliced bread. They have to embellish their abilities and to get the arbitrator to give whatever deal either side is looking for. So I do think they box themselves in. It seems to me, though, maybe, Vic, that the Bruins were trying to send a message to Swayman that you're our guy. Look, we've proven it now. Now you're our guy. We've even traded Ullmark. So, but then, they didn't get their deal done. So now they've left themselves in a tough spot.
Yeah. And right now, based on what you read, and there's plenty out there, this might actually have as much to do with term as it has to do with cash. So that's a story that will continue to unfold. So turning over to the Metro, probably no team made more of a splash during the offseason between trades and free agent signings than the New Jersey Devils. But just because you acquire a bunch of new players, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to mesh all at once. How do you see it?
Well, and again, with the Devils, you talk about burning questions and flames, and the Devils.
Yep. Yes.
All goes together, right?
It's all synergy. Yeah.
You know what? I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Sheldon Keefe, who's also a new coach with the Devils, can get all these new faces to mesh together. I'm very optimistic for the Devils this year because I think that they're not all, but many of them have an agenda this year to prove that last year was an anomaly. It's easy for you to say, anomaly. Sheldon Keefe is going to want to prove that he didn't deserve to be fired, that he is a good NHL coach. I think we all know that, but he might be trying to prove it anyway. I think even Dougie Hamilton wants to come back and play this season, a full season, and really give it everything he's got. I think Jack Hughes wants to stay away from injuries and prove that he's not a player that should be on a non-playoff team. And we can go on and on throughout the lineup. And so it'll be interesting to see how they do mesh together, but I'm very optimistic for Tom Fitzgerald and the New Jersey Devils that they are going to really challenge The Rangers, who I still think are the cream of the crop in the Metro Division, they're going to challenge the Rangers all season. See if I'm right or not, but I really believe that.
Well, they've strengthened, starting and goal with Jacob Markstrom. The defense is bolstered and healthy, and you can say the same for the forward group. So much bigger things expected for the Devils this season, and I look forward to them putting forth the season this year that I think a lot of us expected last year.
And Markstrom comes from... so it goes into our burning question.
Here.
It is.
All coming together.
Just give them the division title now.
Well, let's see if you could tie Flames with this, because we're going to move over to the Western Conference. And, of course, the big headliner during the offseason were the moves made by the Nashville Predators. And how do you see them deploying their new stars?
Well, they've definitely improved their club. They've definitely aged their team. Meaning that they're an older team, but they're going for it right now. Something we're not used to seeing happen in that Tennessee city of Nashville. They usually don't do that. I really am. You talk about having an agenda. How about the agenda that Steven Stamkos must have? Here's the captain of the Tampa Bay Lightning, who's basically... how can I put this nicely? But he's basically allowed to leave, and not really much effort put into keeping him with the Lightning. He immediately signs with the Predators, at the stroke of midnight on July 1st, and has been quite verbal about what he thinks the Predators need to do to really be a contender. They got to think contender. They got to think Stanley Cup and so on. And so you add that to Marchessault, who comes in from the Vegas Golden Knights, who's won his Stanley Cup there. And you combine that with the others that they've brought in. And it's going to be Brady Skjei has come into the Nashville Predators, I might add. So, you got a completely changed lineup. You got more of a star-studded lineup there. You already had hardworking guys in the lineup from Ryan O'Reilly and so on. But I think now you've got some star power put in there too, at least for the near future.
And turning over to the Pacific, there's a question really in goal for one of the teams that I really had very highly regarded entering the season, and I still do. But what about the question about the health of goaltender Thatcher Demko of the Vancouver Canucks?
Yeah, it's been a mystery all summer, hasn't it? Well, actually, since last year's playoffs, he suddenly was injured, and we know that it's an injury of some major extent because it went on all summer long, and there was some thought that he was overworked, both in the amount of games he played and in the practice regimen that he went through with their goalie coach. So having said that, again, I'll say what I said about the Boston Bruins is that the Vancouver Canucks cannot be as good as they can be if they don't have Thatcher Demko. That's just the way it is. They can get through. They can get through a period of time, but not we're not talking 60 games get through. We're talking if they have to get through the first 20, they can get through that. But they're not going to be as good in the Pacific Division if they don't have Demko. So the burning question is, what is his status and when will he be back?
Artur Svilos came on early in the Nashville series and was pretty heroic in helping Vancouver get past the Predators, and then he managed to get the team all the way to Game 7 against the Edmonton Oilers before the Canucks finally fell. Is he enough to be able to sustain the Canucks in a number one role until Demko returns?
Depending on how long that absence is, I think I'm not one to judge Svilos because I don't have that capability of doing that from my TV set. But until he proves that he can be a number one goalie, I think he is going to have to just do the patchwork for Demko. Now, maybe he will prove that he can be the number one goalie. Maybe they'll run off 10 straight wins or something, and all of a sudden Svilos will be the number one guy, and Demko, well, give him more time to get back. We don't need him to come back so quickly. Who knows? But the way it's currently constructed, in my mind, Demko's their number one, and they're going to be looking for him to get back as soon as possible in order for them to be as good as they can be.
I think these 4 burning questions are worthwhile to keep going periodically during the course of the season. This was your brainchild to do here, and was actually a lot of fun to do it.
It was, and we just got to make sure that our producer, Bob, has the flames ready to go up on the screen when we say about burning questions.
It's all about the editing, and we certainly look forward to continuing this segment during the course of the season. This is the human side of the story, brought to you by the Game 7 Group. And earlier in the show, we had a really insightful interview with St. Louis Blues general manager Doug Armstrong. And Armstrong was the architect of the only team that has ever won the Stanley Cup in St. Louis, as they won in Game 7 against the Boston Bruins in 2019. And Game 7, indeed, are the ultimate 2 words in sports. Succeeding requires the best of teamwork. At the Game 7 Group, transforming individuals into cohesive groups allows every team the potential to achieve extraordinary results. Game 7 Group offers various services such as team building events, plus coaching and speaking engagements aimed at improving team dynamics, productivity, and overall performance. We all want to be able to succeed in the big moment. Check out the Game 7 Group website at game7group.com/NHL Wraparound to learn more. Right now, a special incentive offer awaits our podcast listeners. Take your team to the next step. The Game 7 Group will get you there. And Neil, it was so enjoyable to have Doug Armstrong on. And during our summer coolers, we talked about the lineage of the Patrick family. And there's also quite a history with the Armstrong family as well.
There sure is. And, in July of 1969, the Neil Armstrong that everybody knows stepped out onto the moon. And but the Neil Armstrong that I knew before I watched that Neil Armstrong step out onto the moon was number 8 in the National Hockey League's linesman's uniform, named Neil Armstrong, was in the original 6 as an official. And you remember when we had the glass much lower, that the linesmen actually grabbed the top of the glass and put their skates up on the top of the boards to allow the puck to go by so that they weren't interfering with the play. That's long, long gone now, because you'd have to be 20 feet tall to be able to do that in today's game. But Neil Armstrong, Doug's dad, was born in 1933 in Plympton, Ontario, and was able to be linesman for his first NHL game on November 17th of 1957 at age 24. Only 24 when he did that game. The game was the Bruins and the Leafs, was his first NHL game. And there was a brawl at the end of the game. No surprise there for that day and age. And, of course, Neil Armstrong would have been a strapping, strong guy at that point and was able to break up several of the combatants. Surprisingly, in his 1,744 game career, 1,744 game career, Neil Armstrong was only hurt once, only had one injury. And that's when Gary Dornhofer fell and his stick broke Neil Armstrong's hand and he had to wear a cast on it, but he didn't miss a game. He was injured with the cast on his hand, but didn't miss a game. So he retired in 1978, Doug's dad did, after officiating 1,744 games. And then when I got to meet Neil was when he was a scout for the Montreal Canadiens. He was someone who was always gregarious, fun, and happy going. And of course, it was a thrill for me to be scouting for Detroit at that point and be overseas with Neil Armstrong and think like, my goodness, I'm with Neil Armstrong, the guy I watched all the time on TV and so many years in the league. He rightfully so became a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1991. The one thing that we didn't mention when Doug was on was Doug has a sister, Leslie, and we don't want to forget that Neil Armstrong had two children, the famous general manager that we just had on the show, and also Leslie, his daughter. So Neil Armstrong is very proud of his son, Doug, rightfully so. He was able to still be with us when Doug won that Stanley Cup in 2019, passing away shortly thereafter. But what a great hockey family and what a great lineage. And you could see on Doug's face how proud he is to be the son of Neil Armstrong.
And having seen my first game in 1968, I actually saw Neil Armstrong officiate many, many times. So just great memories, and it was a terrific discussion. And as we sign off for today, a special thanks to Doug Armstrong for coming on. Also, thank you to the Game 7 group for sponsoring us. And thank you, as always, to our listeners. Can't do it without you. Please send questions or comments to NHLWraparound@gmail.com. Don't forget our website, NHLWraparound.com, where all of our episodes are available. And I think we're going to enhance the website just a bit as we start our new season. Next week, our 2024-25 season preview. We will be joined by TNT and NBC Sports Chicago analyst Darren Pang as we look forward to the new season beginning in October.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.